Hello and welcome to my podcast called Innervation. Innervation was inspired by my previous podcast, Silence, where over the course of 2 years, I spoke every week with a total of 100 women from science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM. I kept all of those guests anonymous so that they could talk openly and honestly about their lives. And we discussed everything from their experiences, what they've learned along their life journeys, and their hopes and ideas for living fulfilling and contented lives. Because their identities were always kept safe, the conversations on Silence were always so raw and transparent, and we didn't just talk about being women in STEM, but about everything. The topics that tended to come up were also the same topics that I discussed with my mentees, or my friends, or I'm asked about after I've given a talk in schools and colleges. It seemed clear to me that there are some topics that are really important to us, but we only discuss them with people that we feel really safe with or that know us well. Basically, they're topics that we only talk about when we let our guard down and we're able to show our vulnerability. So what I've done is sift through all the episodes of Silence to bring you my favourite sound bites on these certain topics. Each week on Innervation, I'll be reflecting on the perspectives that came up on Silence that I feel are actually pearls of wisdom, that I found particularly provoking, inspiring and empowering, in the hope that they resonate with you too. This week is all about empathy. So I've been reading various definitions on what empathy actually is, and in a nutshell, it's our ability to connect with others, our ability to understand how another person is feeling and to truly feel for that person. You know, it's very different from compassion or sympathy. Empathy is a real ability to connect on an emotional level with other people, which often means that, you know, you have to care and you have to want to actually connect with someone on an emotional level. What I've been realising recently actually is that IQ and EQ are really important things. I mean, you know, I've heard those terms, you know, academic intelligence and emotional intelligence, IQ and EQ, being discussed and written about, and people seem to know what they are. But I'm realising more and more that actually when I went to university, I really developed my IQ, but I didn't really learn much about EQ. My emotional intelligence came from living life and going through experiences and actually being very self-reflective, which is why I think, you know, it's something that I bring up on Innervation, because innovation is very much about self-reflection and turning inwards and really trying to discover your own truth. And my truth recently has been that it's not all about developing intelligence, academic intelligence. And for a long, long time in my life, it was all about the academic side of things. It was all about getting the best grades. It was all about achieving top of the league tables. It was all about accomplishments which were driven by my brain. And as I've got older, I've realised that actually emotional intelligence is so much more important. You know, it's how we connect with others. It's our ability to process our emotions. It's our ability to actually feel emotions. I mean, you know, when I think back to the times when I was preparing for exams and things like that, like I had to put my emotions to one side because they really got in the way of thinking clearly and logically and methodically. And I think often in science, especially, in order to do well in science, you really have to stop listening to your heart. Or let's just say there's not much room for emotions and heart and soul. And, you know, it's all about what your head can achieve. The other day I was in an exhibition and it was a huge building full of art. And I was on one of the floors, and it was about, ancient art and then when I was looking at the floor plan, on another floor there was science and art. And so I then went to that floor, and I really noticed a massive difference between art and science in art. And I think what was massively lacking was just passion and soul and heart and messiness. Like, all the science and art objects and pieces were very neat and precise and accurate. And all the art was colourful and messy and unstructured and wild and different and unique. And it really got me thinking that maybe sometimes in STEM we actually don't allow ourselves to go outside of a structure and boundaries. And whilst that's great for achieving a lot in science, I think it does mean that you end up missing out on something. And maybe that something is empathy. I mean, science really does allow you to get the answers right, to be very binary often. But empathy and the creative side of things isn't about getting answers right. It's about expression and the messiness of life and the randomness of life and the surrender, I guess. I think the reason why empathy is such an important topic to me is because I think I only came to really appreciate empathy later on in life. When I was studying STEM, it was all about achievements and percentages and grades and very quantifiable stuff. And once I had jumped through quite a number of those kinds of hoops, it then became about finding more to life. And that's when I discovered empathy, maybe, 10 years ago or something. And now I really seek it. I want to develop my empathetic skills because, I want to be able to connect with others. I want to have deeper and more meaningful conversations with other people. I don't want to just talk about measurable things and, I don't want to talk about, measurable things. I want to delve into the unknown. I want to discuss and philosophize and all of that. And I think empathy really helps with that. And I think that's why I ended up starting my podcast, Silence, where I got to speak with a bunch of women, one-on-one. I anonymized their identities. And so really it was one soul talking to another soul about their experiences. And it was about connection and hearing stories. And my guest from episode 61 really appreciated that. And I think she summarises very well what I was trying to achieve in Silence. And with Silence, my podcast.
Oh, yes. And that's why your podcast, I just love it so much because you are creating this space to tell these real stories so that people can empathize. When you get empathy in the picture, that's what gets people, thinking about it and resonating with it and feeling like, oh, this is part of my identity because this is how I feel too. And so sharing stories is so huge. Having these conversations is so huge. And getting people who don't normally listen to these conversations to listen is also huge.
I think we have got to a point where we stop caring about other people's stories because we're so obsessed about our own. I've been guilty of that, where I'm so focused on a goal or an end result that I've kind of ignored everything that stands in the way of achieving that end goal. And that often means cutting myself off from other people and being really focused. And at the time, I just thought, wow, my concentration levels are so high. And that might have been the case. But I think what I really sacrificed when I was that focused was my ability to empathise with others. And so when I started the podcast Silence, I really wanted to go back to hearing from other people, identifying with other people's stories. And I think that's why socialising and having friends is so important, because it really gives you an opportunity to listen to other people and share experiences and learn and connect and have your feelings. You know, your friends may have experienced things differently to you, and that's okay and really interesting at the same time. And so Silence for me was an opportunity to really go back and just say, you know, almost apologise for shutting everybody out in order to achieve my STEM qualifications and say, how was it for you? And me too. My guest from episode 61 then goes on to say,
way to communicate with people is stirring up that empathy. So I totally agree with what you're saying and what you're trying to do with connecting on a human level, because that's the level where people understand. That's why so much of science is personified. I mean, my work on batteries, we call it a cycle life of a battery, and we do a post-mortem analysis when we take them apart. And you know, when your battery dies, you don't say it stopped working. We personify everything because that's how we understand it. That's how we can understand it.
It's funny, when I was growing up, my mum always used to say that your dad's like a robot, because my dad is so logical and so organised and so precise in everything he does. He's an engineer himself, and so everything ran like clockwork. And whilst that is so incredibly amazing, and I love my dad to bits, and I just adore him in every single way, there was no room for being human in engineering. And when I was pursuing engineering, I really missed that human connection. I really missed relating to other people and admitting that life can be a bit tough sometimes, and making mistakes, and not being quite perfect, and things not going according to plan. And when I started my podcast Silence, I realised that so many other women within science had the same issues I had. And by talking to one another, we were able to empathise with one another, listen to each other's stories, and really share experiences and share feelings and understand each other. And maybe that's why I ended up in the career that I do now and not in straight engineering, because I think it really, I think I really missed that human connection. I really needed to be in an industry or in a career that had the capacity for empathy. So why don't we teach our youngsters to be empathetic? Where are we going wrong in terms of developing people's emotional intelligence? Well, when I look back on my own schooling education, there was no room for learning about emotional intelligence, and maybe this is a space that I want to move into eventually. I remember at school we got, a sex education class where we learned about the processes, and it was all very mechanical and all very clinical, but we weren't necessarily learning about the soft and squidgy things like emotions and feelings and how to deal with adversity and failure and how to contain our joy and all of those things. I mean, I actually can't believe, looking back, that I was never taught that. I mean, it's just so important for living an empowered life. It's so important for being able to hold yourself together and, you know, hold your head up high, essentially. It's quite shocking. And, you know, still today, I don't think students have an education on their emotional intelligence. It's almost like it's ingrained in our traditions. And, you know, I think biologically, one gender may have a tendency to be more empathetic than the other. But I also think it's a lot to do with nurture, not just nature, in how we raise our girls and our boys. It's almost acceptable to not be empathetic, because in not being empathetic, you're not seen as being weak. By having feelings and understanding other people's feelings, and you can stay concentrated on the end goal. And, you know, I think what's often confusing is that people that really focus on the end goal, be that to be the richest, the fastest, the best, you know, something quantifiable, you're able to achieve that goal, which is great, very impressive, well done, pat on the back. But I think you really miss out on the human experience of actually feeling what it's like to be on that journey. And I think that's why often you hear those stories of people becoming really, really successful, but extremely lonely or depressed, with the huge piles of cash they're sitting on, or, you know, the number of cars they're driving, or whatever the measure of material success is, but they feel empty inside. And I think empathy and having the ability to be empathetic really plays a massive part in the richness of human experience. So maybe it's about really changing the way we educate our young, teaching them to be empathetic from an early age. My guest from episode 45 touches on this subject.
Regardless of whether or not you're male or female, emotional intelligence, being able to understand people and being able to show empathy should be a thing for both sexes. It's not that they don't feel empathy, it's not that they don't empathize, it's more that society has trained them to suppress those emotions, so then they put on this facade. And there's really no need for that. But that is what I see in medicine sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, look, how many of us could put our hands up and say that emotions can be such a distraction and such an inconvenience and a real pain? I mean, especially as a woman, I can tell you that every month I probably feel more empathetic at a certain time in the month than at other times. And it's really annoying, especially, you know, when I was doing engineering and I had deadlines and, you know, mathematical equations to solve and things like that. I was just like, I cannot be. I just don't have time for emotion right now. I don't have time to be connecting with other people, to be understanding other people's stuff. I've got deadlines to meet, you know, and there just seems to be no space in society for emotion. And I don't know about you, but I find it really difficult to ignore that. For me, emotions are usually a massive elephant in the room that I can't not ignore. But other people are so much better at sort of ignoring things like that than I am. I'm just about being extremely frank and sort of upfront about things like that. So how do you get more empathetic, I guess, is the question. And I think, you know, there is so much reading out there, especially on Google, about it. And I think one of the important things is to be able to listen. sometimes we don't even realise we're not being empathetic. I don't think many people really think that empathy is important. I wonder if there are people out there that think empathy is actually massively annoying. But I think, the human experience is either highly regarded or completely ignored. And for me, I think it's really important to have a rich human experience, and money can't buy that. And no one can provide that for you. It really is all about attitude. And our ability to enjoy our lives, I think, stems from the ability to be empathetic, the ability to relate to others and actually put your own feelings into context and to connect with others, and so for me at this point in my life, empathy is about becoming a better listener. It's about caring about other people's experiences rather than being self-obsessed or self-centered about my own experiences. And it's about seeing myself as equally as human as other people, not seeing myself as better than or less than or somehow different, but saying we're all human, we all have that in common. And even if you are massively different to me, I'm going to acknowledge that and accept that and not judge it in any way. Like, oh, I'm not as good, I'm not as smart, I'm not as this and that. But to just say, yeah, you're different, but we're all human, and it's cool that you're like that. And it's cool that I'm not. I guess not being so judgmental is something that comes as a result of being empathetic. And empathy is definitely something that I'm working on more. And it's something that I really want to have in my life. And it's amazing because I never even knew it existed until a few years back. So I'm going to leave you with this soundbite from episode 81 where my guest talks about her skills in empathy and where she thinks they've come from.
Gift. And I think that's based on my upbringing. You can't buy the freedom that I had from any university, or any private school. And that's what I want young people that have a diverse upbringing to, understand that you get a skill in terms of empathy, in terms of being able to, talk to anyone. I go up to homeless people all the time and hold their hands and talk to them because I feel that it's vital that these people, most of them are suffering from mental health issues, most of them are ex-military, they're not there. No one grows up going, I remember when I was in LA, in Hollywood a few years back, and my friend was with me and I was like, oh, look at that homeless person. My friend was like, you've got to stop feeling sorry for people. And I was like, why? I think they grew up going, I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to smoke crack and I'm going to live on the streets. But it's not what anyone makes a choice to be, it's circumstances and situations.
So there you go. I think empathy just makes you an all-round better person because our ability to relate to others and our ability to understand others and our ability to listen to other people can only be a good thing. I mean, empathy just seems like such an important skill to have as a leader and as a successful person in life. And just a skill that just makes you overall just a nicer person. So empathy is definitely something that I think is empowering and something essential for self-evolution. And so just by bringing up the topic on this podcast, maybe it might get the cogs turning about how important it is for you Thanks for listening. Please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. I'd love to have your feedback about this episode or any others that you've listened to, and maybe even some suggestions for future topics for the show. It's all about self-discovery and evolution on innovation, particularly with a view to becoming a more fulfilled and contented human being. Be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.